have a next speaker, which is Dr. Sahib Mustaqim Bleher. The title of his presentation is The Wise Qur'an, the Eternal Books of Guidance translated into plain English. And okay, sorry, the presentation of title is What Makes a What make a good Quranic translation? I will read a brief bio of Dr. Bleher. Dr. Sahib Mustaqim Bleher was born in Heidelberg, Germany in 1959, and whilst working as newspaper journalist and sub-editor, he was introduced to the Quran during extensive travel. After being impressed by what he read, he converted to Islam aged 21 and took a year out to study Islam and Arabic. He spent another year at the Islamic Foundation in Leicester whilst working on translation of Muhammad Haykal, Hayat Muhammad. This is a book on Sirah by Dr. Muhammad Haykal into German for a German publisher. In UK, he organized a public campaign for the recognition of full-time Muslim faith school and developed an Islamic curriculum, and later on co-founded the Islamic Party of Britain, a political party with the objective of conveying Islam through political engagement, serving as its general secretary throughout the years of its existence. Upon the request of IDCI, a Dawah organization in Birmingham, UK, he undertook the task of editing Pickthall and Yusuf Ali translation of the Quran to make them more accessible by carefully replacing selected term and expression with more contemporary one. Dr. Bleher, you have 10 minutes sharp, please. The floor is yours.
Yes. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillahi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. I have been, as a linguist, working in technical and legal translations for some 4 decades. And what I want to do today is share some of the issues, the challenges that a translator faces, which are really not different when it comes to translating the Quran from any other text, in the sense that what we're dealing with is transferring meaning from one language and style to another. Of course, the Quran is different in the sense that it is divine and nobody can understand the mind of God. And like Al-Ghidr says that you cannot have patience with what you don't know. Likewise, we cannot necessarily translate what we don't comprehend. And also the Quran is addressed to both men and jinn. And of course, there will be passages in there which will be understood by one and maybe not the other. Other than that, the common translation issues that we are dealing with of style, terminology, whether we have a literal or a cultural translation, etc., time, place, history, change of meaning, they are identical to any other translation. Talking about style, and it's never easy actually, because you can't just say that you can ever move from one language to another without losing meaning. Even when you use the very same word, let's say the sun and the moon, you think they're the same in every other language. But in German, for example, the sun is feminine, the moon is masculine, opposite to English. So even there are changes. When it comes to style, there are people like Jonathan Lombard, for example, who say, well, Quran is high literature. It doesn't need to be understood by everybody, just like Shakespeare isn't understood by everybody. But then not do I just disagree with that, but the Quran disagrees with Jonathan Lombard in that, because the Quran describes itself in the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah as a book of guidance. Now, a guidance must be understood to be followed. If I go out in the street and want to know how to get to the town hall and I ask for directions, I don't want somebody to recite me a poem or sing some rap song or something. I want them to give me clear directions so I can find my way. So the Quran must be in an English, in a language that somebody can take from, that he can understand. And the Arabic Quran is in a language that is described as mubin, as clear, as easy to understand. Or just we just heard from Dr. Shanaz Sheikh that the Quran is built on a vocabulary that is also easy to remember. So we must bear that in mind when we do a translation. Like in my case, I spent 13 years translating the Quran in what I call plain English. So let me give some examples of what we encounter, because the dictionary approach does, of course, not work. Words have different meanings, and they also change meaning, and we have derived meanings. For example, and we don't want to talk about four-letter words. They change meaning so much that now they're used as punctuation marks in the English language. So let's take a simple three-letter word, a nut. What is a nut? The squirrel eats the nut. But when the mechanic works with the nut, it's a completely different thing. So you cannot use the same translation in another language for the same word, because it means something else in a different context. It has to be contextual. Take this a little bit further. If our mechanic lives in the Americas, then he will keep his toolbox in the trunk and he works under the hood of the car. But if he lives in England, he works under the bonnet and he keeps his tools in the boot. All these were items originally referring to clothing. Now, hijab, on the other hand, now referring to clothing, is an item that once had nothing to do with that and was a dividing partition in a room. We have the same in Arabic, for example, or we have the word wahi. Very important concept. Allah reveals through the angel Jibril to a prophet who conveys the message. Yet the term wahi is also used in Surah An-Nahl, where Allah does not reveal through the angel Jibril to the bee, but he inspires the bee, or rather we're talking about provides the bee with its instinct of what it should be doing. We have in Surah Maryam, for example, Zakaria alayhi salam, when after being given the good news of having a son, he wants a sign. He's told to fast for 3 days from speaking. So he goes out and doesn't speak. Awha ilayhim. He didn't reveal to the people that they should pray morning and night. He signaled to them. So the word wahi here means signaling. It's completely different. So these are another example, other, harm or hurt in the Quran. In the ayat, la yarudunaka illa adha, it means an insult. They won't harm you other than in the form of insult. But if we go to the instructions on Hajj, the pilgrimage, and we talk about the person who may shave his hair early because he has adha mirasi, he has adha on his head. Well, it's not a headache, it's a disease. It's not a hurt, it's not a harm, it's something completely different, but the same word is used. So we have to be very careful and we have to be contextual. We had that yesterday with the word darab. Darab translated to beat, but that's the translator's choice. It doesn't always mean to beat. If Allah daraba mathalan, if he coins a similitude, he doesn't beat about the bush, he coins a similitude. Just like when we hit the road, we don't beat the tarmac. These words have different meanings in different environments. Even propositions, for example, culturally, in Germany, children play on the street. The street is the tarmac. In England, they play in the street because that's the space enclosed by the houses. It's different. Likewise, in Arabic, in paradise, rivers flow under, tahtiha al-anhar. But that sounds like an elaborate sewage system, which it is not. In English, well, they flow through the landscape. In Arabic, because the water is below the surface. In English, because we look at the wider picture. Just like we look at the street enclosed by buildings, we look at the landscape that rivers flow through. And we have to bear that in mind with our translation. I'm mindful I only have 3 minutes, so I rush through. There is also the historical understanding. People, we have to be humble in our approach. People who were attending the Battle of Uhud definitely understand those ayats better than we do. On the other hand, they would not until recently have properly understood the ayat in Surah Yunus that tells us that the body of the Pharaoh would be preserved for later generations. We now know that it has been discovered as a mummy, but back then these ayats were not open. And we must have an open mind likewise, that we don't read our own ideology and interpretations in the Quranic text. So what makes a good translation? In my view, a good translation has to be purposeful. That means it has to bear in mind the target audience. It has to be for a specific audience. If you want to create a Quran in a simple language, you do that. If a Quran for converts, you may leave some terms like Bewley did in there, Salah, Zakah, you don't need to translate them. If you have a specific Quran for biblical, for Dawah, for biblical correspondence, like Kaskas did, or maybe highlighting various Qira'at, like bridges, then this is your purpose and you must be consistent in that. You can't change register halfway through. And you have to be honest in that you separate clearly comments and additions. You don't mix the text of the Quran with what you understand to be the Quran. This is all very challenging, and therefore, like any translation, but more so because it's the divine word, not easy. Now, what actually makes a good translation? I think ultimately the success is decided by the reader, because the reader will take from it, will like it, will benefit from it. The Quranic translation then becomes popular, and that ultimate success is from Allah. So I think rather than we talked about authentication and things like that, we need to let the reader decide, and of course it must be available and affordable as well. We need to let the reader decide whether a Quran translation ultimately, whether a translator has done his job. But these are some of the issues, and there are many more that have to go into approaching the subject in order to arrive at a easy to read but eloquent transferal of meaning and style from the Arabic language to the English language or any other language that we might want to translate the Quran into. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.